To order for the month of August. Our announcements this evening: an executive session of the Borough Council of the Borough of Gettysburg was conducted immediately following the adjournment of the August 8th, 2022 monthly general business meeting, consistent with Section 708A2, Section 708A4, and Section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act. An executive session of the Borough Council will be conducted immediately following the adjournment of this evening's monthly general business meeting. This evening's work session, consistent with Section 708A1, Section 708A2, Section 708A4, and Section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act for the following purposes. 1, to discuss matters involving the employment, the terms and conditions of employment, and the policies and procedures for complaints related to borough employees. 2, to provide informational updates and discuss strategy related to the negotiation of a new collective bargaining agreement with the International Brotherhood of the Teamsters, local number 776, with the Gettysburg Borough Police Employees Labor Organization. 3, to receive and consider information relative to the proposed decision and order, and if entered by the hearing examiner of the Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board in case number PF-C-20-42-E, captioned Teamsters Local Union number 776 versus Borough of Gettysburg. And 4, to receive informational updates on pending grievances filed by the Teamsters Local Union number 776 on behalf of the Gettysburg Borough Police Employees Labor Organization. And 5, to review and discuss matters of borough business which, if conducted in public, would lead to the disclosure of information on matters of confidentiality protected by law. So, our first public comment session is restricted to items that are on the agenda. I would note you have the Main Street Facade Improvement Grant Program, Theft of Services Ordinance, the Sign Ordinance, Fire Code Revisions, Portable Restrooms, the creation of the rank of Master Sergeant, and the complaint policy for employees. So, at that point, let me ask for your name and address. Anyone for public comment? All right, if not, we will go on to the Main Street Gettysburg Facade Improvement Grant Application. Ms. Sellers.
Good evening, everyone. You have a copy, the council does, of the Facade Improvement Program. This is not a new program. This has been instituted for Gettysburg in the past successfully, and I am pleased to announce that I will be completing an application to the Department of Community and Economic Development for another round of funding. The maximum amount that I can ask for is $50,000, which would allow for $100,000 worth of improvements to happen for our businesses. Upon that grant back to Main Street for us to manage locally, we would create an application process that would probably start in early 2023. But that's already laid out. I've gathered interest from the community, the business community already, have about $121,000 in proposed projects already, give or take. Those aren't based on actual bids. They'll obviously change based on a lot of different factors that may be involved come next year, supply chain and workforce availability, and what owners may decide is going to be their final estimate of what they're going to invest in their properties. So I'm excited to make this available, and I'm here to answer questions about this process as best I can. But that's where we are at this moment, and I'll field your questions accordingly.
All right, questions for Ms. Sellers? Yes.
Are there any limitations as to what they can propose? Can it be used for masonry, glass, signage?
It has to be a facade related, that's why it's called the facade program. So, but there are a rather extensive list of rules and limitations of what they can apply for. I've had questions about whether or not somebody can install a handicap ramp, and that is not a facade issue. That is an ADA compliance issue, so that's not. So what we're looking at is physical improvements to your structure. So updating your signage, updating paint, existing paint. Windows are a big ask right now for people that are looking to have a 50% match to their investment in their building to be able to put in new windows that are compliant with HARB and all the requirements that they would normally have to do for any improvements that they make to their business. But this gives them the opportunity to have half of that project up to $10,000 project. So they can invest $5,000 and the grant would provide the other half, and that's not often do you get that opportunity to have state monies invested in your business. So.
Did you just say that someone did ask about creating a handicap accessible entrance, and that's not an improvement to their facade?
It is not an improvement to a facade under
as
this
far as
program.
Under that program.
Under this
Gotcha.
program. It is an improvement, yes, I
Yes.
agree. But it is not a facade
Gotcha.
appearance improvement. It's an access improvement, which would be probably a different pot of funding.
Do you happen to know if nonprofits are you allowed to apply, this is state funding from the Keystone Communities Program.
Correct.
So some nonprofits can apply directly to the Keystone grants.
Correct.
Are they allowed to apply for both, do you know? Through this program and directly
You
through
can
Keystone?
apply for both because your application here through us would go through a grant committee here under Main Street, Gettysburg. So there would be a vetting process that we do locally, especially if the demand is high. We only have X number of dollars, and so we obviously can't award every project.
Because
so
the main Keystone is the entire state. It's a different, a completely different panel.
it's a completely different panel.
I
Correct.
also note there's no, I just love to make sure the public is aware of this. There's no cost to the borough.
No.
But the borough is absolutely going to benefit from this.
Absolutely, yeah.
From any business
Correct.
and property that is improved. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Others? Awesome.
All right. If not, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all.
All right, so if you're a business owner and you're interested in that program, please feel encouraged to contact Ms. Sellers and we can get you the materials that you need. The Theft of Services Ordinance. Ms. Marshall.
Hi, so there have been several issues brought up related to garbage this year. One is people putting their personal trash in the already overflowing receptacles downtown, and then also an issue that we have frequently is people depositing their trash in other people's dumpsters, thereby often taking up the room in the dumpster. And those, it's very difficult, and Chief can talk a little bit about this in a bit too. It's difficult to prosecute those, it's difficult to prove. Even if you know who's done it, it's very difficult to prosecute. And so what we were looking to do was put a couple of ordinances originally in the waste ordinance to address that, so that we could address it by citation and not through criminal. But as I was researching, I found this theft of services ordinance example that a few municipalities have used. And another issue that we have in the borough disturbingly often is properties that are apartments where one person's utilities is put on another person's bill and they don't know it. And it's not necessarily the tenants doing it. In most cases that I've been made aware of, it's the property owner. They maybe added a unit and then put the gas, split the gas with this unit, split the electric with this unit, and split the water with another unit. And often without the knowledge or permission of the people who in the units that they're putting the utilities on. So this would make it very clear, even though that is technically a theft of services, like this would make it very clear that we do not accept that in the borough, and it gives us a way to be able to go after it when we're doing inspections too. So that's the background on why I broke this out sort of into its own nuisance ordinance rather than in the waste ordinance as we originally intended, just for those two standards and kind of bringing it into its own place. Chief did give some comments and good comments about the waste portion needing more clarity so that we can effectively enforce it, including needing to define pedestrian waste for the portion talking about the use of waste containers. So that what we're talking about is not letting businesses and residences use the trash cans on the street for their personal use. Like, those are for pedestrians. They're not for household garbage. We obviously have seen pictures of this in some of the pictures that we had for waste management, but we have routinely in certain garbage cans, they fill up very quickly, and a lot of times it's with household trash. Somebody puts a big garbage bag of either household or business trash in that can, and then there's not room for pedestrian trash in it, and it starts to overflow. So this would address that and allow us to issue citation for it. And then the other one is not letting people deposit, waste related, is not letting people deposit their trash without permission in somebody else's garbage. Again, same issue except with private dumpsters. People are putting their trash in somebody else's dumpster, it's overflowing, or they don't have room now for their own trash. And then there's other just general language relating to theft of services, about damaging or altering facilities, and unauthorized use of facilities. Most of it was originally geared towards cable, electric, and the like. So that's what that's where that's coming from. And then originally in the draft that I had included, and that you might have for violations, I had had language about it being a misdemeanor or a fine, but we revised that late Friday after talking to Mr. Eastman, and just had it be a fine, because it was the burden of proof for, and also the enforceability for us too, for a misdemeanor is too high. Does anybody have any questions about what I've said so far?
So in the event, you mentioned, somebody tapping into somebody else's cable service. How would that fine be generated? Would we be relying on the cable company discovering that and reporting it to us?
Or the tenant or the property owner?
Because we don't have a means of detecting that, right?
I mean, if you can see where they did it on the wire, like if
It's I think
Where
a
they
lot of
connected.
these types of things, you're dealing with like regulated rental scenarios. So when we go into an inspect, and you see something that's tapped in,
I don't know that I would be able to recognize that was done by the tenant and not by the cable installer. I mean, they consistently use splitters to expand service to multiple addresses.
yeah, I guess I'm thinking about
So
utilities.
when it comes to, and this has happened with gas, we had somebody saying they thought they were paying somebody else's gas bill. We had Columbia Gas come in and look at it to verify. That's absolutely appropriate. Sometimes it's obvious, there's 2 meters and 3 units. But or there's 3 hot water heaters and 4 units or something like that, but it's not always that obvious, and it's always not, I mean, we aren't professional installers. We're going by what people are telling us in terms of their bills and what they think they're paying, but we, looking at the wires, can't necessarily tell exactly how things were split. So yeah, we would rely on professionals to verify that is in fact how it's split up.
I think that's almost going to be a required portion of any, if it goes to court or somebody pleads not guilty on a citation. That's almost going to be a required element to prove that case.
That's a statement by
Yeah, something from the gas company. And
professional.
I think one of the other issues you're going to have is, like you mentioned, cable. Now, who's the victim? Which is a good thing why we have it, because you don't necessarily, if you put it in an ordinance, you don't necessarily have to have a victim. If you use a theft of service ordinance out of the crimes code, I have to have a victim. So who's the victim? Is it the person who's actually paying for the cable, or is it the cable company? Because it's not costing them more to run their neighbor's cable, but it's, the cable company's losing that business. So who's the victim there? And I don't necessarily think you need that so much with the ordinance violation. But I do believe that it would be necessary testimony to get a conviction on this, to have the gas company, the cable company, whomever, verify and testify that in fact it was not them that did this and someone else. I think we'd have a whole other slew of, unless you can correct me if I'm wrong here, a whole other slew of issues if it was gas, from a safety standpoint.
But it can be done.
Well, sure.
You know, and that's where I think when you mentioned cable, I think cable is different than the rest, or perhaps like the internet service of our wireless service is different than the rest, and there's no meter. So, like when a cable comes in, right, for service, whether television or internet, and it taps off, you're really right. The way it goes together, it doesn't look like it really takes a whole lot to do. When I think of like gas or electric or water coming in, usually it's going to be pretty obvious because you have a meter, and then after that you have a T, and you shouldn't. So whether that's being done by a property owner without someone's knowledge, or however it's being done, but yeah, the kind of, like when we look at a building, a lot of times you go to a building, if I see 9 electric meters on the side of the building, there's 9 units in the building. You know, but I mean, a property owner could elect to do it the other way and just incorporate that into your rent. But yeah, with gas and water and things, water not as much anymore with the PECs, but a lot of times it would be pretty. I think it'd be pretty obvious that it had occurred. But yeah, I think the chief, you're right on par with. You'd have to have somebody basically say we didn't do this.
Yeah.
That's what you're gonna have someone have to say.
Okay.
So Mr. Eastman hasn't had the opportunity to fully vet this, and we do also, again, I had comments from you last week about wireless technology, which was not included, and then we need to shore up some definitions too. So I want to make sure that Harry has enough time to thoroughly review this before we actually, formally propose an ordinance.
Yeah, it is a type of thing where there are instances you wouldn't think this is occurring, and they just are, and sometimes they've been long-standing, that people don't understand it or don't realize it. But even things like sanitary sewers on here, there are places where you might be surprised where there are sanitary sewer lines. Then you find out. Usually when they break, that's when you find out.
Okay.
But I think it's important to note, yeah, there's some revisions we may have to look at with definitions about, and I see the chief's comments here, and those are well taken, like what is pedestrian service?
Right.
Right. That's a.
Yeah, he also made a really good comment too, where we talk about it shall be unlawful for any person or business to deposit, place, or dump any refuse or garbage into a garbage or refuse container owned, contracted, or maintained by another person. I can walk into a store and put like a soda can in their garbage, and that would apply. And so we want to make sure that.
Yeah, make sure we don't.
Yeah, I mean,
make this ridiculous.
I use the term when I was talking to Carl, we want to make these more bulletproof, but that might not be the right one, but the right term. But I think we need to shore them up just a little bit for enforcement purposes, because what we don't want is the judge ruling it's a de minimis infraction.
Well, you don't want to create a law that
No.
really doesn't.
No.
It goes beyond what you're attempting to do.
And it's, a lot, it could be read as saying, you can't throw your garbage in a garbage can. And that we want to stay away from that.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a drink or something and you walk in and drop that makes sense. We're trying to avoid someone taking their whole household trash bag. It's a big difference.
Just add without permission. Because
Well,
you don't have
that is
permission
in there. The problem is
without
if you walk into somebody's store and just drop your stuff in the garbage can, you technically have permission. No, so I mean, there's that. I'm looking at it from that technical sense, and I'm trying to make sure that we don't have that issue.
Yeah, one of the things we realized with the waste management circumstance and some of the mapping that's been done is there are a number of cans that you might think of as public but aren't. Some of the business owners in town have placed cans to deal with it. So, you have your soda, you walk up to buy ice cream, you throw that in the can.
That's a problem.
It's probably not actually a public can. It could be, but it might not be. There are a few establishments I can think of that sell things like ice cream, I think right off the bat, that like the can might look distinctly different or it might not. So you don't want to create that kind of
And I think there's language out there, we just have to find it. I mean, there's, if it's, if it appears to be a public-facing can, and you throw your, your soda cup from 7-Eleven in that can while you're getting ice cream at Mr. G's, I mean, that's not the intent of this section. So I think that, I think there's language out there, it's just a matter of finding it. And I tried to come up with it with a little bit of time today, and I just couldn't, between meetings. It's just, like I said, it's out there, it's just a matter of finding it.
Right. Okay. Does that give you sort of,
It
we're
does,
still in the
gives me everything
developmental
I need.
phase, I think
Yeah.
that's the important thing with this is we're very much still at the beginning.
One of my thoughts as we've discussed it here this evening too would be potentially separating out the municipal or the waste provisions, and because we already have definitions tried and true for different types of waste, et cetera, as per the chief's point, and then having a separate theft of services for other items. Because I think actually, Chief, I think I'm correct that theft of services really gets into utilities, cable.
It does. There is
under the
specific sections in the crimes code
in
for
the
theft of
crimes code
services.
and so forth.
And that's where I came up with all that earlier. You need to know who the victim is and
Right.
that investigation. And actually there, most of the time you're gonna see the victim as the company, whether it be, gas or cable or whatever. So it's just,
But let me work with Carly on that, but that was at least one of my thoughts based on the comments and concerns that were raised this evening, maybe separating it out, so might be the best approach.
Okay. All right. If that's everything for theft of services, we can move on to the sign ordinance. I'd ask the members to pull up the questions so they can refer to that in the PBS. The sign ordinance was something we had visited in 2017. There were a number of questions that are posed there. The items that you see in red were items that they did not elect to change at the time. The item in yellow is what was raised more recently regarding the pitting directly onto those surfaces. And then those items in green were items that had been proposed for change at that time, but with circumstances they did not come to pass. A lot of the reason to look with this also involves things with a case called Reed v. Gilbert from 2015, which deals with content. That's something the solicitor will be generally dealing with and bringing back to us. So, at that time, we'd received a lot of public comment about these also. The first item on the list deals with murals. There are 3 questions posed there with murals. The first one, which is in red at the time, the council had split on, but this is something that comes up a few times, and I'm not saying we'll reach a conclusion here this evening, but if a mural defined as a picture on an exterior surface or building painted directly upon the structural material is to be considered a sign or not. And this has come up a few times in the years, preceding and since. So is there anyone that'd like to revisit the concept of whether a mural is or is not a sign? It's one of the, and a lot of that gets into basically the, there are limits upon the square footage of signage. So if a mural were not a sign, that's really what it comes down to. If a mural were not a sign, then that mural would not count against that square footage anymore. The other issue there is whether or not the mural is actually, tied to the actual business or not, or, it's, in the current ordinance, a picture on an exterior surface of a structure or building, a mural is a sign only if it was reflected by language, logo, or pictorial depiction to the advertisement of any product or service or the identification of any business. So this would only impact said items that do one of those things. Basically, if you, for instance, around that time, it was proposed that one of the cider establishments in town would like to paint something on the side facade that essentially said cider house or had a large apple, right? And under the current definition, that was something that would be considered a sign. And therefore, their scale that they desired, you know, you can't do a lot in the permitted area. So, anyone that wants to revisit that at this point?
I don't think it needs changed.
Is everybody good if we go into substrate, or do you want to talk about
So right
this?
now, right now how it is we can, right now in the borough, we consider a mural a sign.
If it,
has advertising.
yeah, so
Or is there not a question? Is a mural a sign or not?
if it includes a logo, language, or pictorial
Then it's a
depiction
sign.
for advertisement of the product or service,
What if it doesn't include that?
then it's not considered a sign.
So a mural is a mural and a sign is a sign.
But a
Some
mural
murals are
could be a
signs.
sign. So the mural on the
I didn't-
side of the old Waldo's
Right,
structure,
is a mural.
right, is a mural. It doesn't depict any service.
Correct.
You could take the same graphic and say, I don't know, add some seafood.
Uh-huh.
And if that are like a seafood business were open in that building, then
Uh-huh.
that would be a sign.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense? So if you add the words like fresh fish and some fish in the rolling waves, then it's a
Sure.
sign.
I just think, I think a mural is a mural and a sign is a sign, and if it has advertising, it's a sign. It's not a mural.
Okay.
That's
So I
just my
think what's
opinion.
there, you're
They
okay
should
with
be
that, it
separated.
sounds like to me.
They
Okay.
should be separated.
I think that,
And advertise, we have sign ordinance with advertising specifics already written out, where we have to go through permits, and we have to have a certain square footage, and it has to have this and that on it. That's already there.
so, yeah, given the spirit of what you're saying, I think you're
Okay.
okay with what sits.
Great.
All right, the second question was raised more recently, and that involves whether a sign should be permitted to be painted directly onto a building or structure. At current, the ordinance does not allow you to paint directly on the surface. It doesn't basically allow you to use that as your substrate. You have to have another material mounted. And in fact, the business that raised this originally does have another material mounted. They have a piece of, well, I presume to be wood, but could be some sort of synthetic.
So I guess my question relates to if a building is already painted, it already has paint on it. What's the problem with painting a sign on it, as long as they're going by our strict guidelines on what amount of, what square footage they can paint on, they can have for signage?
No,
To me, if a building is already painted, drilling something into said brick is actually causing more damage than the paint.
it's a valid question. I mean,
Again, I still think
the
it's
distinction you're kind of drawing is important, that you're talking about a building that is painted.
already painted, correct?
Right, because if you have a masonry that's not painted, that's a whole separate issue.
Whole separate issue.
Right, with horror, basically.
Right.
And that's not gonna be, with dwell upon.
You
I
can
don't know if
also
I
have-
can give you a good logic on that.
So I think there's a lot of if-thans with that, because you can also have a cinder block building that's not
Right.
painted, but is there a reason not to paint it? So, do you wanna get into all of the if-thans, or do you wanna say with HARB approval or with planning commission approval, so that the material can be reviewed, to see if it's appropriate, and then just leave it?
I
the
like
issue-
that approach.
Yeah, I think the issue of whether it's the material's painted or not generally falls under the historic district ordinance. Like, they would
Yes.
say, you can
Yep.
paint this or not. This ordinance just deals with, and I don't really know that I recall, though, logic of,
I mean, I know that there are physical reasons to restrict paints or certain paints on brick that hasn't been painted.
right, but like what Mr. Carr's alluded to, is like something that was.
But if it's already painted, yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure.
I think that, excuse me, I think the ordinance currently states that you can't
Not
paint
at all,
on,
yeah,
you can't
that's-
paint on a building.
That's correct.
It does not define whether or not it's already painted. I think that's the issue.
Yeah, I think that would be restricted by the historic district ordinance. So you're like kind of two different ordinances playing. The historic district ordinance would say you have bare brick, you know, you're not gonna paint it, without approval. The sign ordinance says, is this a sign or not? So I think it's assuming you already have approval to paint whatever it is, whatever the surface is. I don't oppose changing this, I don't really know exactly why it is the way that it is.
Ms. English, do you have a strong sense of what would happen if this were allowed under the sign ordinance and somebody were to come to Harb and say, hey, I've got this building, it is in the historic district, it has previously been painted, and I would like to paint my very tasteful sign on the side of the wall or above the door, here's my design. Is that something Harb would be inclined to grant? Typically.
I would say possibly. I know Fourscore has that on their brick, and I don't think that was painted before, so they did put up a sign. I don't think with permits. But in the past, we have denied painting signage on brick, even brick that's been painted. So it would
And has it been denied based on
the sign code,
ordinance
size,
or
regulation
or
with
on the
that.
Harb guidelines?
And the Harb guidelines, they were, for some reason, typically against business signage or advertising on brick or the building structure itself.
And this was something that was just raised recently, we did not, everything else we had at the time was put to Harb and put to the public, and this was not because of it just coming up recently. You know, I think that whoever wanted to do this would have to understand they're within all the other parameters, you know, namely the square footage parameter. Like the person that had asked this, you know, did put up a substrate and had a sign painted, but they're within all those parameters because they have to be anyway. You know, the 50 square feet and so forth.
So if that wasn't the case, they may reevaluate that, and I'll have to double check with section 106 to make sure there isn't any federal issues with doing that. But once it's painted, I don't believe there is, if it's within the size, you know, square footage. But right now, the sign ordinance prevents a large mural or advertisement for the business on the side because it exceeds the limit.
So I'm hearing we should probably see if Harb has an opinion.
Right, I think Harb continues to point to the current ordinances as written, which, I get that, I get why they're doing that, but I don't get why you would still allow us to paint it on a piece of wood and drill it into the brick when the brick's already painted.
Yeah,
So
no, I mean, I
Harb-
think this is.
I think we just need to talk to Harb about that.
This is something where I think, yeah, they're taking their direction from the ordinance.
Correct.
Yeah, I think
And
you're
I
right
think
on
a lot
that.
of times our zoning boards and our hearing, our zoning board and our Harb, we have, what do we have to point to? Our current borough code and our ordinances as written. And sometimes we,
Get stuck in
it's
there.
just a,
Right.
hamster wheel. So,
Mr. Moon, Mrs. Butterfield, you open to the possibility, and we're not making like a real hard commitment here.
I'm
this
just
point.
wondering if we need to be specific about materials of what constitutes a banner and what I don't know, that might not come up, but that just occurred to me that you generally think of a banner as a drapable material and a sign as not drapable, but that may be getting too specific.
Okay, so in terms of painting directly on the surface.
I also question using the word tasteful, that everything.
Yeah, that's true. Somebody said, yeah,
One man's
Eyes of the
baseball.
beast.
that is actually the entire, well, not the entire, but that's a significant portion of read is
Right.
content. I mean, that, the statement that it's simply content, so we're sort of oversimplifies it, but it does relate to that. Okay, so we will see what our other members have to say about that and what Harb has to say about that.
Yeah, I think Harb's a good location to run that by. I think, I believe that provision probably has been on the books since the late 1990s. And I think that was driven when our historic preservation officer actually rewrote the sign ordinance. So I think there's a lot of, I think that's what is driving that particular, or was what was driving that particular.
Dr. Powell. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
All right, the follow-up question was related to murals, and that's the question here is if anyone wants to take this up, if you want to consider an adjustment or an increase to the size for murals that continue to be considered signs. Is there anyone that wants to entertain that?
What page are you on now, sorry?
Sorry, the next, it would be.
Still on page 3.
The very, yeah, I'm sorry, not the bottom, the very,
Second red question.
middle of page 3. The follow-up question, right above banners.
I think that goes back to what Mr. Carr said. If a sign is a sign and a mural is a mural, then that question sort of evaporates.
What are the current definitions? I mean, maybe that's where we see confusion. What is the current definition of a mural and what is the current definition of a sign?
Well, so the sign would have size restrictions based on the ordinance, and the mural would not have those size restrictions, but could not
Be
have
advertised.
those identifying characteristics.
Right, gotcha.
Yeah.
So to me, a mural is a mural, a piece of artwork. And a sign is advertising.
Right, yeah, I mean,
That's what I see as the definition, but if that's not what the Borough Code defines it as.
You're just paraphrasing it,
Okay.
basically.
Mhm.
No, you're pretty much on point.
So then the follow-up question, if a mural continues to be considered a sign, is.
So the
Because-
signs that are, the murals that are signs, if that makes sense,
uh,
right? Does anyone have a desire to lift the restriction on size? I don't really. You know, so if it says, you know, this product for sale here, do you want to allow them more than 50 square feet?
No, I think a sign advertising or sign ordinance on advertising is pretty
I mean, my question ethically would be,
good where it's.
now you kind of allow one sign to have one set of regulations and any other to have.
Right, that's why I think you have to separate it completely.
Okay. All right. Banners. Okay, so the next section gets into banners. Now the items you see in green here were items that were essentially greenlit for change at that time, being 2017. Should on-premise business advertising banners continue to be limited to 30 days, 3 times per property per year, or be permitted for a longer period of time?
This specifically calls out advertising?
That's how it is phrased, yeah. So advertising could mean an event, though. Right, it wouldn't have to be a product, it could be an event, a service. So, like, this has been something that at the time came to discussion because the then director of the library had interest in hanging banners on that, you know, front of the, kind of between the columns of the old postal building. And the way it was set up was that you could, but it was limited to 30 days, 3 times a year. And at the time that this was discussed, the proposed increase, I believe, was to 6 times a year.
For 30 days.
for 30 days. Yeah.
Years ago, the Arts Council wanted to hang long-term banners on the front of their new building that would identify it as an art center and be colorful and attractive. And there was so much conflict about that, that what they did was move the banners inside of those very long windows. So the banners could be seen from the outside, but they were virtually inside, and that seemed to float for a while. Another conflict with the whole concept of banners had to do with the flagpole. One of the big festivals in town wanted to hang banners on our flagpole in the square. And that filled this room with people in uniform. I mean, every inch was taken of people who wanted nothing hung on the flagpole. So that came into being of this thinking of let's deal with banners.
The Gettysburg Festival.
I remember that, yeah.
Back in the, with that.
It wasn't up there for long, it came down pretty fast.
Half a day.
Should never have gone up.
No.
So I guess my question would be, you know, is there interest in changing it to 6 instances a year or more, or, I mean, at the time I favored the 6 just because it's,
I'm fine with how it's currently.
I mean, it was kind of a compromise at the time. Some people wanted to run banners basically constantly. And there were misgivings about that.
I think I'm fine with how it's written. I think given the amount of special events that this historic town has, this could assist in some promotional ways for said events. But I don't think that they need to be, I think 30 calendar days is plenty. 3 times per
Oh,
property.
yeah, okay.
And
so you
I think
agree
it's
with
great, I think it's fine as written.
Okay.
There was also a time at the reopening of the Majestic that it was desired to run a banner from the roof of the Majestic across the street to the roof of the Times building. So it would be across Carlisle Street. And PennDOT
I was gonna say, that was,
put an end to that.
that sounds like a.
Or the double-decker bus tours.
Yeah, no, I can think of instances where people have stretched, because usually it's done with something like steel cable,
Mm.
and yeah, it can cause a lot of damage.
Hanover Borough does it, or used to, a lot, but I don't think they have, I don't think it was on a PennDOT state highway.
Well, and the issue really is the height,
Uh,
right, if you get them high enough, but then the question is, can you see them?
Hanover Borough used to do that a lot. The Dutch Days Festival.
So, three instances, 6 instances,
You know,
other numbers.
So I think the interesting question here is like the library proposal, right? The
Uh-huh.
idea that colorful banners between the columns could look really pretty commanding. And I imagine climbing up there and hanging them is not something you want to do repeatedly throughout the year, whether it was 6 times or, you know, and then take it down for a month and then put it up for 30 days and take it down for a month. So I could see making a change for something like that, but at the same time, you know, there's a restaurant in a neighboring borough that I won't name that routinely has like beer banners on the front of their facade, you know, it just says Bud Light Lime and we sell spaghetti or something like that. And I can't say that it's you know, a fetching use of the medium, and I wouldn't want that year round. So, though something tells me we won't be getting that application from the library in its current location anytime soon. So, I would think we would probably just leave it as is.
Okay. I mean, I think a lot of this was envisioned for groups like that might have, or hold seasonal.
Right. Do these permits go through Ms. Marshall's office?
They do.
For banners, do you get many?
Yes.
You
So
do?
I actually, we have in practice probably have not been requiring people to take them down for 30 days before they put them up. It's just you get you essentially get 90 days a year.
Right.
Use it judiciously, you know, keep in mind what you have coming later this year, because if you use it up, you use it up kind of thing. I think one of my challenges with the sign ordinance, and what the challenge that a lot of people have, is that there's no appeal mechanism. So if you can't meet exactly the letter of the ordinance, there's no
Relief mechanism.
there's no relief. And so, you know, we're talking about changing the banner regulations specific to one use or two uses for nonprofits. That's something that would typically, like, rather than, like, we would just look for relief for that, but there's no place to go for relief from the sign ordinance.
Well, I mean, I don't know, to me that's, you know, we're looking for kind of uniformity of application. So, I mean, this is
Oh, yeah, of
something where,
course.
it was interesting where it came up, some of these topics, some entities just really kind of didn't bother bringing them up, was kind of my read. I think certain businesses maybe didn't, and then others, you know, here or there did. And a lot of them were actually nonprofits in the end. The library, the seminary brought certain things up. I think the reason that they settled on 6 was because, or the reason we have 3, is to essentially prevent the all-year, you know, maneuver. But at the same time, I'd have to kind of concur that, I mean, I haven't heard anything recently. Have you had applications where people are looking for?
No, I mean, we have people that are creative. They will apply in October so that they can use October, November, December, and then they'll apply again in January to have January, February, March, to try to cluster everything together. But other than that, I've not had any major issues with the post-COVID with the banner restrictions. During COVID, there were some challenges because people were trying to get changes of hours and changes of service and changes of things out there, but post-COVID, I've not had any complaints.
Okay.
There's a sentence here on page 4, street banners erected and displayed by the borough for certain things like holiday purposes. That was an issue because our Christmas decorations one year were banners from all the light poles. Do you remember, Sarah?
Yes.
And businesses who had been not allowed to have banners came forward and griped and complained and caused some conflict. But that's why that's in there, that the borough can do that with their Christmas banners.
Well, that's something where, I mean, there is a different, you can apply a different standard to the actual borough. There are things the borough can do that, you know, an
And
entity might not be able
that
to.
vein, different standards could cover what we're saying about the library, that the wording could say certain institutions could have exceptions where businesses would not. And that would allow the Arts Council, the library,
Courthouse.
institution, courthouse.
Well, I think the difference here is that, like, this is, like the banner on the light poles, we're the actual government operating it. Whereas every other entity you're describing is some sort of separate institution. I don't know, give some guidance on that.
Would the distinction be that we are doing it for the public good and that a private entity is doing it for commercial gain?
That could be a distinction.
I'm trying to think of the spirit of exactly how that's articulated. But I think it was pretty much carved in there specifically to deal with those holiday decorations.
Oh, I think so.
There's no doubt in my mind.
There's a specific amendment to our sign ordinance for that.
Before
Because-
that, they had been wreaths, and then suddenly one year they were banners, and it was.
Because I've had people
Controversy.
ask me about other banners on light posts, and there are some legislative challenges that we could change, and then there are some practical challenges that we can't change. So someone had requested, they were requesting to basically put up banners here downtown during this time of year, during the growing season, and the banners and the flower
hanging
baskets on the post, they occupy the same physical space. So that was like a very like an instant practical problem of like, well, you really can't, like, you never see them both at the same time, and people thought, oh, we could just do this. And I'm like, well, you really couldn't without making some sort of physical change also. And I know if John was here, he'd start talking about how busy things start to look. I feel like with signage and so forth.
I would love to have those banners all over the lamp posts with arrows that show where the parking garage is. I'm not kidding.
Separate this discussion about legislation, how we cover banners or signs, and what the borough should possibly write. So what I'm hearing is 3 as written is okay. And if we have any public comment back, we could certainly revisit any of these items. Okay. I think that also kind of covers the next question dealt with the institutional zoning district use up to 120 days. This kind of, it's the same topic essentially about expanding that to other districts, and we just basically said no based on above. Banners are, the next question is in red. Does anyone want to talk about increasing the size? So currently they're limited to 10% of the facade. So for example, I think this came up, I think in discussions with the library, possibly also with the old bank building that Open Minds owns. There were a handful where basically you take the square footage of the facade and you get 10% of that, and that's what you get. And some people wanted that much larger. Any interest in looking at that? Okay. All right. If they're hung and removed from a structure or property at the same time as a set, should these banners be considered under a single permit? This came up because at the time we had a different employee issuing these permits, and we had scenarios where someone might be caused to apply for multiple sign permits. I don't know if we have that issue anymore. So if someone wanted to hang 3 banners today,
Yeah, I think it should be clarified in the ordinance,
put it in
but
the
in
ordinance.
practice, I issue it as 1 banner. We've had instances like the Rupp House is a good example. They've had, it met the size requirements, but there's pillars, and it wasn't practical to try to measure out where the pillar would fall in the banner to be able to wrap the banner around the pillar and have it be straight across. And so they did, 2 separate banners technically, but
Right.
it was essentially 1 banner. The messaging was one, it was 2 pieces of fabric with 1 message spread across the 2. It wasn't repeating banners. So in practice, I think that it makes sense. But I do think that it would be better if it was clarified in the ordinance.
does anyone have a problem with clarifying that they could be 1? Okay. Any interest in, if they're combined into a single permit, setting some sort of size or material similarity?
Would they still be held to the same size restriction though? I mean, if even there was 3 of them and they were
Yeah, I
different
think
sizes,
that-
they would still collectively make up 10% of the square footage of the facade?
Yeah.
I think that would make sense. Otherwise,
Right.
why have a limit for 10%
Right.
of this facade?
Yeah, I think the assumption here is that they go up at the same time, they come down at the same time, they're the same thing.
Yep. Even if they have completely separate messages.
Yeah, and even if they're different colors or
Okay.
whatever. That takes us quite a ways. We have our next matter, which is down on page 6. Frontage.
Should the allocation of the maximum square feet per each?
So as it's written, it states that, the ordinance states that 1 square foot of sign for each linear foot of frontage of a lot. But under no circumstances shall the total permitted sign area for a single business or activity exceed 50 square feet, the exception of billboards in the industrial district, which shall be regulated pursuant to another chapter reference.
This is not, I don't read this as 50 square feet per frontage. It's, you have 1 square foot per linear feet of frontage to a maximum of 50 square feet per business. So you have, if you have a building that's 300 feet wide, if it has 5 businesses in it, those 5 businesses have to share that 300 feet, but no individual business could have more than 50 square feet of signage.
Yeah, I think why this came up at the time was we had someone that was basically using 2 different facades and trying to add 2 numbers and make them greater than 50, even though the ordinance says 50. And a lot of the public comment in this was really helpful. I remember specifically Paul Witt coming in and talking about a variety of things with the ordinance, but as a franchisee, he appreciated because he could say to Best Western, I can't do what you're asking me to do. Because he didn't really want to put up that much signage. He thought it looked tasteless.
Right.
I think was my
Well, there,
read.
yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, there
he
becomes a
didn't-
point where it's too much commercial district look and not enough quaint, historic, charming downtown village look.
Yeah.
So I'm totally fine, I agree with Ms. Marshall, and as a matter of fact, I believe I have it on my property. It's 50 square feet max. That's including a front and an alley. They all total together, combined, not 50 for the side, 50 for the front, 50 for the back. No, that's too much.
Okay. So, how others feel, just want to make sure that's crystal clear that there's
Yeah.
no.
I think the question is more confusing than
Yeah.
Well, I think, yeah, it reflects the times we were in. I'll put it that way. There were things that were happening where people really tried to stretch things.
Mhm.
So the subsequent question is moot then, because there's not an additional 50. So that doesn't really apply. That takes us down to portable signs, the bottom of page 6. So the thing that comes into place with portable signs basically is whether or not
Getting to that time.
whether or not the ADA provisions are sufficient is basically the discussion point there. Should the placement of 4 portable signs be further regulated? And the follow-up is, should the right-of-way distance 40 inches per ADA be clarified or expanded? And should the maximum size be changed? So kind of mention all those. At the time, there was discussion about, I think the pedestrian access issue is kind of the big one.
And not
but-
just, and sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
And not just related to portable sign placement. I mean, that's an issue in many other things.
Yeah, I was walking the other day and I was like, it doesn't look like 60 inches.
No. Well, you know,
Um,
and I've had this discussion with many residents and businesses. The tree wells are tree wells. They're not necessarily intended for, especially for Americans with disabilities, to go through. So are we talking this much feet from the edge of the tree well to said, you know?
We
Yeah, I think
absolutely
you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's not in
And
a
the
lot
other
of
thing
places.
the other thing that came up with this
Not enough room.
at the time was with some of the bump outs, we start to see these increasingly used in the street designs.
Mhm.
So if someone had a bump out,
Right,
essentially, could they put their sign out there?
right.
which from a practical, some people didn't like that. From a practical standpoint, one of the things that allowed them to do was to put that sign out without impacting the ADA passage. Whether you count it to 48, which is in the ADA, or ours is 60, I think, mostly, yeah. So kind of I think the purpose, if you read through the notes, the reason at the time that it regulated further, didn't want to, was that they essentially considered ADA to be sufficient and did not want to get into the discussion of the bump outs and other areas.
So I think this is problematic. I've said before, I think we should get rid of sandwich board signs in the middle of the sidewalk. Even without the ADA, they are difficult for folks without disabilities to get around. Unlike the placement we have for tables and chairs, which are marked and delineated by the borough as to where they're allowed to be, the sign ends up wherever whoever's working today puts it.
Right.
And they're not going out with a measuring tape. They're just putting it down and going back and doing the rest of their work. So there really is no guidance as to where it's going to get put today, by whom, and is it going to be blocking the right of way. And it's almost, I mean, unless we want, Pete out every day with a measuring tape just doing sandwich board signs for the first couple hours of the day, I mean, there's really no way to enforce it practically. And so we're creating impediments. And honestly, I think you'd be hard pressed to make the case that your sandwich board sign is driving sales. So
I see Mr. Moon's point, but I also know that there are some businesses that really think that their sandwich boards do drive sales. However, if we're already going out, I hate to add more work on our staff, but if we're going out and marking where tables and chairs are going to go, is it possible to talk with the business owner and say, this is really where your sandwich board sign needs to go for ADA compliance?
Well, the two things that kind of come to mind right away kind of intersect with things you both said. And they both center around the quantity of sandwich boards that I think are in use in the borough.
Mm-hmm.
So, for one, I think that does make it difficult for them to go mark, like, hey, here's where your sandwich board goes. From another perspective, I think that we have to recognize a lot of people are using sandwich boards, and they must think they're effective.
I think they're being used almost exclusively in the historic district. You don't see them, in a lot of other areas. I don't know that the use is that widespread as we get further away from the square, which unfortunately is also where our sidewalks are the most narrow and congested, with the most number of people trying to pass on them. We have several places where passage just on a good day is challenging. We have this perennial little corner right in front of the pub where if somebody parks a little too close to the curb, not only could you not get a mobility device through there, but two able-bodied people can't pass. So, you have to stop and wait for one person to walk through, one at a time. We all like I think we've all expressed that there is a energy and vitality to having stuff out on the sidewalk, whether it's dining or music or whatever. But I would say, I would lean back on the arguments we made in other discussions about the proper use of those public spaces, and I'd say they're for people, not for cars and not for signs.
I think it's I agree with almost everything Mr. Moon is saying right now.
Call me Mr. Matt.
Mr. Moon is saying right now. But I do, at the same time, I do want the borough to be, the borough government to allow small businesses to do as much as they are able to survive, so that we are not turning into a ghost town. But yes, there are a lot of sandwich board signs out, and there's sometimes not put where they should be. I think we need a lot of public comment about this, and a lot of chatting with businesses and seeing what our constituents want.
Yeah, I think it's problematic because of our ability to enforce how much staff time we have. You know, I can respect that. At the same time, I'm aware that they're a very popular medium. I was recently in a community I had not visited before, at least not their downtown. I can tell you that I saw a sandwich board and it alerted me to something I would not have seen. And really it was because of the way it was constructed. There was not the board, but the street, the way it was built, there was a setback, and like we have some places here where there are setbacks. You know, different venues where maybe that could be helpful. And I'm aware that also a lot of, maybe not a lot, but it seems to be more common since this was first discussed some years ago. I see a lot more of them are like chalkboard style, and they'll use them to put their specials on or things like that in large print. So I'm not really, I'd agree with Mr. Carr, we need a lot of public comment.
We need a lot of public comment on it,
I'm
and
not
if it
welcome
if
to
it did go away, then I would ask for us to reconsider the 50 square feet of signage, because we're taking away some sign advertising. If we were to take away sandwich boards, if we're going to take away something, let's give them something else on their building.
Well, right now we're giving them sidewalk. I mean, that's a pretty big ask right for now for free.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm inclined to leave them and ask people to, and try to enforce.
But
a
we
little
shovel
better.
the snow and we sweep the sidewalk, not the borough.
Yeah, well, that's a fact.
Yeah.
So yeah, we do a little bit.
I mean, there are people that, you know, I think we're
Sidewalks
kind of
for
talking in
free.
some of these cases about kind of like the worst, right? Where you say like, this is right in the middle, where people know they shouldn't put it to begin with.
Right.
And they do it anyway.
Yeah.
But then I also see a lot of them that are put in places that are pretty intelligent. You know, they're put in places where you might have a few sets of steps sticking out, and they have it kind of set in back, you know, in between those steps coming down. So that space wouldn't really be used anyway. You know, I see a lot of people do use them appropriately, and I don't want to punish those people because some people are just really arrogant about how they do it.
Well, I don't know if it's even necessarily, you know, malevolence or arrogance, right? I mean, we just have certain portions of our downtown that are just by the nature of the way they're built that are less passable. Like the north side of Chambersburg Street on the first block is just really very challenging. And we can't tell, you know, all the other business owners, yeah, go ahead and get a sandwich board sign and put it out. But you guys, you know, sorry, you can't because this sidewalk is too narrow. So instead, everybody gets to have a sandwich board, and we have this very narrow sidewalk that has lots of, you know, remediation on it for ADA issues, where it's very hard to pass. And if you are then putting out signage and chairs and tables and, you know,
Right.
any number of things, as you know, in addition to that, you essentially have taken away the utility of the sidewalk and the access to these businesses that are seeking to thrive and survive.
Sure.
The ADA is just not that new.
No.
So, I mean, if you've purchased a property within the last 30 years, which I know there are people that have owned them much longer, but, you know, maybe a certain block, it is more difficult, but that's part of reality, right? Like, I just don't think that restricting them across the entire community to deal with a few areas that don't allow it makes a lot of sense to me.
So if we had a storefront that had a narrow sidewalk in front of it and then had built a ramp that takes up space in that right-of-way, and they apply for a sign but they can't achieve the 48 inches, do we just tell them they're out of luck?
Yes,
Yeah, they can't do it.
we do.
Yeah, no, that's the kind of, I don't know, that's how I'm looking at it. Because there are a lot of very unique places where I knew someone who owned a property, and I think it's been sold, but the way it was built and the way the lot lines were, they basically couldn't install an ADA ramp. Like, it was essentially impossible. The way that people got into their property routinely was from like a side gate or a rear gate, where they were actually walking on someone else's property.
Mhm.
Like, and it was the way it had been for a very long time, decades certainly. You know, and when it came to the point of like they'd have to have an ADA ramp, and it's like, well, what you're trying to do physically isn't achievable. You have to reevaluate how you're using your building, or start having discussions about, you know, what sort of change you could make.
Right.
Because I don't think they had rear access. That was an issue. Like, they didn't have alley access. There was alley behind them, but someone else owned it in between. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just not, you know, looking to restrict it that far.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the ADA issue is a problem, but I don't know that adding an extra regulation is really going to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think we need a lot of public comment on this, but I will say I've received complaints from residents and business owners about their neighboring businesses, as a matter of fact, that, you know, it's almost impassable. When you're walking dogs, and there's people dining, and there are people coming from both directions on the sidewalk, especially right now in tourist season. It's hard in some places, so I think it's important for, and I think Peter's doing a great job, and as best he can, one person, going out and checking everything and making sure that everybody's compliant.
Sure.
Yeah, I think since these questions were drafted in 17, we expanded that to the 60 inches. Perhaps. It's like the next question I call out the 48 specifically, but I think that we revised the.
I think it's 4 feet, but I think it should be more than 4 feet.
I agree.
Also,
So
It should
that's
be
really
more.
what this is. So it is 4 feet. I'm trying to think, because I know there are different, I'm thinking of probably the construction of sidewalks and
That's 5 foot.
that whole discussion.
If there's no bump out within, is it 95 feet or something like that?
Well, it went through the whole discussion because there are whole areas of the borough where that's not practical though too. So like Colt Park was built, I think, with 4-foot sidewalks or something just larger than that. And so like, you know, where do you do that? I remember that went through planning. That was a really complex matter. So if we keep the portable signs, should that 48 inches get larger? It's kind of the follow-up question here. Should be clarified or expanded? I think some of this sometimes gets into what the chief kind of favors, where if he's dealing with something like our theft of services we just talked about, it's in the crimes code, but it's not super easy to actually make it work, or sometimes not even possible to make it work in terms of enforcement. Do you put your measurement right here somehow, or do you rely upon the ADA, or do we rely on some other ordinance section? Because I think, as people have observed, it's not just signage. That was kind of the one thing tree wells were mentioned, right? And there was discussion about signs and tree wells, and one of the big issues really is that it's not just signs, right? Does it belong in a sign ordinance, or does it belong elsewhere? Because we have had all kinds of objects, you know, placed in tree wells and other things, and it's like, is that really a good spot for?
Well, sure, but also the measurement of the right of way. It shouldn't be, we shouldn't be measuring the tree well as part of that right of way. We should be measuring where the tree well ends and then where the next thing begins, so that there's plenty of space. I shouldn't be having to walk into a tree well, and I shouldn't see a wheelchair trying their best to get through, and the only way to get through is going in a tree well. That's just wrong.
Correct.
Yeah, and the use of the term right of way here probably wasn't the best phrase to use. You're talking about the pedestrian access.
Sure, pedestrian access, yeah.
And right of way for either the state or the
Right,
borough
is a-
extends, use a different matter.
Different, yeah.
So my usage of that terminology at that time is probably not the best. But I know what you mean, where it's, well, I mean, North Washington Street, like, we're looking to fix that as part of the bike loop. Like, one of this is what we always try to do with the interloop, is we're trying to basically fix things that are not correct. there's a space there where you can't have your 48 inches, really. How it's built, porches, poles, and everything else.
So I agree with Ms. Marshall, it should be more
Okay.
space, more distance for the pedestrian. I know it's always good to point to ADA, but if we're offering more space, then we're not only compliant, we're more than compliant with ADA. I think there needs to be more space.
Do you have anything in mind
No,
specifically?
no. I think it just needs to be more.
So 60 inches is what we aim for sidewalks, so if we're looking for a standard,
Yeah.
let's just go for that.
And as far as being able to, what's the word I'm looking for? Control that, if it's written, it needs to be written in the ordinance so that then we have something to point to.
Okay. Yeah, I think probably the appropriate thing to do there is, it may be wise to go, walk the borough and
Find out, sure.
look at like how
Yeah.
practical 60 inches would be.
Feasibility study is great.
I'm curious if it is going to be feasible in many places where the sandwich boards are
Yeah,
used,
or you
because
kinda-
you're pushing them closer and closer to the curb so that people who park there can't open their door without hitting a sign. So where do you put it? Do you put it in front of the parking meter? Like, it becomes really problematic as we.
So a compromise could also be, our sidewalk ordinance requires displays to be within 3 feet of the building facade. You could put signs there too. So you're not moving it farther and farther out to parking, you're moving it closer to the building.
You could put it within the sidewalk ordinance. Or we could
No,
put it
I'm saying here, yeah.
Okay.
I think one of people's frustrations when they're walking too, even if there's a clear 4 feet, is the zigzag that you have to do.
Mhm.
And so if your meters and your street trees are on one side and your displays and ADA ramps and dining are on the other side, then in theory, you have a little bit less zigzagging to do. If you can keep signs over there too. I do have, last year when PMCA did a lot of sign enforcement on A-frame signs, we were requiring people to submit a picture demonstrating that they could, of where it would go and that it met ADA requirements. And, I mean, to your point, it's whoever's putting the sign out that day on whether or not it makes it into that specific spot. So if you kind of have an area where this is where they go, and it has to meet ADA requirements, you have a little bit, hopefully you're less likely to have them migrating out into the middle of the sidewalk.
Would we do the same thing we do for the table seating? Would we shoot pins into the concrete to show them?
I mean, this is just a flat 3 feet, so it's 3 feet is 3 feet. With table seating, it varies based on, the width of the dining area varies. But if we just said 3 feet from the facade, then it would be a standard 3 feet.
All right, so I think we should all take a walk,
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And
Yes.
that's something we could consider, because I think it is gonna be dependent upon the fiscal built environment.
Sure. And it may also change some of the seating abilities. Because
It could affect a lot of different things.
if you're talking this amount of footage from their building facade out, but then that is right in front of a tree well and makes our pedestrian passage this, then something's got to give. And it shouldn't be the pedestrians right away that gives. They should have the right of way.
Right, and I think that's the kind of what we've been
Yeah.
highlighting here, is just
So
the
let's
difficulty.
definitely look.
Yeah, and enforcing
See
that.
what's up.
Okay, the next item was down on, at 2/3 of the way down, page 7. This deals with the concept of off-premise signs.
Yeah.
This was raised because at that time, it was becoming more popular not necessarily yet here in the borough, but was becoming a larger thing in communities like ours to have alley-based businesses. So if you have, and I know we do have a few, and I've noticed that sometimes there is signage, and what happens is basically that's the same property. You know, even if it operates out of the rear, they own the front. I noticed one on Baltimore Street like that. But if you should be able to advertise within 1,000 feet or some other measurement when you only have alley access. And this deals specifically just with the government regulation portion of it. If someone wanted to do that, they would then separately have to work that out with a property owner adjacent. So you have an alley business halfway down the alley, you'd have to make some sort of arrangement with the person at the corner, which
Right.
I'm assuming you're probably paying them at that point, possibly, maybe not.
Mhm.
Maybe they're just kind in general.
Or maybe it's a completely different, completely different building.
Well, that's what I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, like it's likely it's a different
It's likely
building,
it's a
so
completely
then
different building, different
that's
business.
but you know, this was more about should you allow it, basically. And it came up at a similar time frame. We were talking about like parking regulations and about, you know, at one time you had to have more parking spaces per, you know, building on the lot, and we started talking about like if you're in 1,000, the reason 1,000 feet comes up is if you're within 1,000 feet of the parking deck, that you should basically be able to count that, was part of that discussion. That's where that number comes from. It's usually about a block. Other blocks can vary.
I think, Harry, didn't this come up also because someone wanted signs on a vehicle that was parked off the property?
Right. I think you're absolutely correct. Not only did someone want to, I think someone was actually.
Someone was doing it.
That is correct.
I remember that part of it. I remember the discussion about like some people at the time, some council members at the time thought that like the borough should be involved in like the operation of this. Not just permitting it or not, but they've been in places where like the public government had like kind of like a stand of signs with arrows, and those signs were like detachable and they could change them over time, and that wasn't something I was personally really interested in getting involved in, where we would operate some sort of
Sign business.
directory.
Yeah.
But if someone can reach an arrangement.
I think we should allow it.
Butterfield,
Yes, nope, that's all I remember.
Mr. Carr?
Should we allow?
Yeah, should we allow?
Yes.
Okay.
Off-premise signs if they only have an alley access.
Yep. Okay. I agree. All right. And the last one also dealt with something I don't think is in practice anymore. Are we requiring people to put their permit numbers on signs?
Do not. I think this was
Okay.
very helpful or necessary when we relied on paper permits, you know. But now everything's digital, we can look it up pretty quickly, whether or not somebody has a permit. You know, you don't have to go through the archives
Yeah,
and figure
so
it out.
that was tailored to
Um,
something that occurred when someone put it into an application without running it. And it didn't say you couldn't in the ordinance, but it just appeared. And I noticed that there's a business at Middle and Stratton, and all of a sudden there was a big number on their sign, and I was like, what is that?
A lot of businesses have numbers on their signs, pursuant, the old sign application required it. On the
Yeah, that's
application,
just because someone
yeah.
just made it up one day that used to work for the
Totally.
borough.
Since all the permits are digital, they're easy to look up whether or not somebody has it, so I don't think it's necessary.
Okay. All right, so I think that gets us through the sign words.
Is this not a time when we can talk about tree wells?
We can talk about tree wells. I think the question legislatively becomes where within the ordinance book it would be appropriate to put that. So, items in the tree wells in general, right? To me, like, it's a tree well, it's meant for a tree.
Correct.
Although I know that can be expanded to also discussions of the right of way and things like that.
The challenge with that we've had is that sometimes people have gardenscapes in the tree wells. And they put up little, you don't really see that on like the main roads, but on Middle Street, there's one where they have a really low fence protecting the tree well and all the plants that they have in it. Those would be objects. That little fence would be an object.
So it might be appropriate to simply address signs.
That's what I was raising.
Yeah.
I don't believe that any type of signage should be in a tree well.
Okay.
That includes flags and yard signs and campaign signs and garage sale signs and.
Philosophical.
I don't care, it just doesn't belong in a tree well. Flowers are lovely in a tree
It's
well.
better off if you don't care about the content.
Don't
Oh, yeah,
care,
it's
the
much better
content
off.
is.
Okay. Others thoughts about signs and tree wells? I mean, I'm kind of inclined to agree. I think a tree well is for a tree.
Yep.
There's plenty of private property for all the flags and signs that you wanna put in it.
Yep.
And within our borough. Go to the private property owner.
The flags usually not signs.
That's correct.
Okay.
I don't think anything should be in trees. The tree wells are public property.
Right, but
Just-
I take also the comment about, like, some people have kind of dressed them up.
And they're trying to prevent people from walking on their flowers.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there's a legitimate conversation too over whether those belong there, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple on Chambersburg Street where the property owners have put down decorative stone around the tree, which is nicer than, collecting garbage and.
I mean, we can be specific and say flags and signs don't belong in tree wells.
Yeah, I guess a lot of my concern with the tree wells is like the impact on the tree, and like the borough plants the tree, maintains the tree.
It's borough property. Aren't also our garden, our quad gardens borough property, aren't also the lovely corners of each around the square, the pots with the beautiful flowers in.
There's a real gray area as to whose property
Whose
those
property
tree
to put
wells
this on.
are, especially on Route 30. I think we would just say, don't put signs in the tree wells and leave it at that.
Everybody okay with that?
Signs and no signs, no flags.
I'm trying to think about what flags I've seen.
No signs, no flags, no banners. You put one, it opens up a can of worms. Don't do it.
Okay. All right. Any other items we'd like to raise with signs this evening? Which I'm sure we will revisit. All right. If not, fire code revisions, we'll put that off mostly substantially for probably in September. Ms. Marshall and I are going to meet with Mr. Malott, probably Mr. Mellors to discuss that at some detail. I did have an interesting conversation the other day about our enforcement or enforceability, and to my knowledge, I don't know exactly how it's covered, but egress. I had someone who noticed that, emergency exits in the back of a building, like a mercantile, were pretty egregiously blocked, and I was kind of embarrassed to tell them that's just common. So at some point, we'll have to have a discussion about, now that we have Mr. Griffion on board, what he covers, what PMCA continues to cover, and how we deal with that. So that's probably something we can add to that discussion. portable restrooms.
So I did a spreadsheet comparison of all the ordinances that I pulled before. The first three are very similar, but I did differentiate, you'll see on the top, what type of city we were looking at. Noticeably, because the coastal areas, even though some of their language is the same, they have kind of a different need. A lot of them, I saw, you know, you have marina areas that might not be necessarily adjacent to the commercial and retail areas. And so people coming off of boats or using the marina needed a place to use the restroom. Most, other than the rural Delaware Township, and even they had some limits to who and how long. These ordinances exist because they were limiting who could have a portable restroom, where and for how long. And so what I'm hoping to get from this conversation today is what, in general, where Borough Council is looking to go in terms of who they want to have portable restrooms, for how long and where. And if we aren't looking to limit that, then I don't know that we necessarily need an ordinance. So some of the timeframes used here for community events, up to 7 calendar days. Private events, one specified 4 days. Some used actually 2 said 4 days. Some just differentiated between temporary use, which was a week, and then seasonal use, which could be 120 days. I think that ours would probably be more lined with differentiating between, you know, community events, private events, construction, and I guess private business use. And since that real hot button item is private business use, like what direction are we looking to go in for that? Are we looking for seasonal? Are we looking for year round? Are there locations, whether they be districts or proximity to existing public facilities? So right now, a lot of I think most of the porta johns that are business related are on Steinware. There's public restrooms in the Old Town District downtown. Do we want to see porta johns in the Old Town District? Are they as necessary there with the parking garage and the bathroom and the restrooms that are publicly available there? I think it makes sense to associate it with public restrooms, and then if more public restrooms come online, then that would naturally sort of phase out some that are in places that don't have public restrooms. But even with that, are we, you know, should they be year-round? Should there be a limit to how many are on a lot? I don't have a good idea of what the temperature is on this.
Well, one of my confusion points was when Mr. Millat was here, what I gathered from him was that essentially beyond like your temporary type of uses of a portable restroom, that basically the way the code is written, it doesn't allow for them.
It doesn't, there's no mention of them. So if you have a business that's open to the public, you have to have a restroom. Now whether you then close that restroom to the public and say use the porta john out back, the ordinance is silent on that. Or whether you supplement that restroom with another porta john out back in addition to your restrooms that are required by the UCC.
So they wouldn't count it.
Right, it doesn't count
It doesn't
towards.
count, but it also doesn't say you can't.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, that was not, okay, that was,
So you-
I misunderstood him.
Yeah, so you can't count a porta john towards your UCC required restrooms.
Okay.
Or your ADA restroom facilities.
I was equating
Those
it
have to
more.
be in the building, they have to be built, fixed, connected to public water and sewer. What we're talking about, with like business facilities are in addition to, whether it's because they are not offering their restrooms up to the public or because they have a lot of members of the public that aren't their customers wanting to use their restroom and they're essentially providing public restrooms. but everybody should have, if they're operating a business that is open to the public, should have a restroom, unless they're more than 35, 40 years old.
Yeah, I think mentally I equated it to wells in the borough. Like, you can't have a well.
Oh.
You know, you can't dig a well, and that's it's your public. You have to use the public water.
Right.
And so I did the same thing in my head with public sewer, so I misunderstood him. Okay, so thoughts on the regulation of portable restrooms? This has been an interesting journey because it focused very much on one property, but the reality is there's a lot more of this going on than people probably realized.
And there are also other events that looking at the ordinances, emergency and natural disasters, if for whatever reason we don't have access to the sewer, people are gonna need porta-johns. How do we want that to look? Since it's an emergency, do we wanna regulate it?
Right, or do you carve out that
Right.
there's a declaration of emergency and kind of do what you have to do, which is probably how it functions. But yeah, I was a little surprised to realize how many, or to hear about how many portable restrooms are out there on what I would call a semi-permanent basis.
Or permanent.
Yeah, if you put it up every year for 8 months or 9 months, is it really temporary in any way?
I appreciate your putting this together, Harley, thank you. But we are a unique tourist situation, and many of our businesses are in older buildings that cannot accommodate large public restrooms. I'm thinking of some of those businesses along Steinway that are in houses that are narrow and older. Right now, I see a great need for porta potties along Steinway. Now, maybe in the future that will not be, and maybe when the visitor center and the Brown House opens, maybe that will alleviate it. But I said the other day, someone with a 2-year-old who has to go to the bathroom and they're down by Pickett's Buffet, to get up to the Brown House is not going to work. And the merchants on Steinway get thanked all the time for their clean, well-kept porta potties in the back of their businesses. None of them can be seen from Steinway. They can be seen from the alley. But it is a good company that keeps up with cleaning them, and right now they are a necessity as I see it along Steinway. Also, I would disagree with being strongly limited, looking under Delaware Township's placement location. That wouldn't work on our street during construction, that very binding statement there. If our next door neighbor to the north was having construction, there's no place on his property that he could place a porta potty that we couldn't see it, or the people on the other side of him, and that's what that binding statement says. It cannot be viewed from a neighbor.
Yeah, that's, and like I said,
It's
that's
a
why I
rural
sort of wanted to
example.
differentiate that, like Delaware Township is a rural township, Westport, Connecticut is coastal, but it's very rural, they have very large lots there. And then the other 3 are more urban, whether they're coastal or inland. Yeah.
I think right now, we need porta potties in some parts of town. Not for 7 days, not for 30 days, but for many days, if not 365 days.
So I guess for the purpose of our discussion here, what I'd like to do is, are people open to the use of portable restrooms on a longer term basis, with the caveat that we could have any number of different restrictions that we could be discussing? So there are, issues in here with location, orientation, screening, maintenance. Do we have a majority that would that's here that would be interested in pursuing this for longer than, say, 7 or 10 days.
I would not.
Okay, that's the kind of what I need to know.
I agree with Mrs. Butterfield, because of the lack of what I would say enough public restrooms in our borough for being a historic tourism. That's why we need them in a lot of places right now, is because we don't have enough public restrooms where our visitors can find access quickly. Maybe someday that will change, but
That's what I'm saying.
right
maybe.
now, which means we would have to do what Mr. Heyser is saying, which is go in through all of these instances and maybe even per district. But yes, the one that I'm looking at closely on your spreadsheet here is the maintenance and the cleaning. And portable toilets shall be emptied by a person, firm, or corporation engaged in the business of cleaning or emptying portable toilets and licensed by state licensing agency and recharged with sufficient frequency to prevent the escape of offensive odors or spillage. Absolutely.
I would just want to remind everybody too that when we sought guidance on this issue from GMA, they recommended strongly against allowing these for long-term use for sanitary reasons. And I would suggest that this very issue, the construction and location of public restrooms on Steinway, would be a great thing for the bid to pursue rather than pushing for prolonged use of porta potties.
That's a tough sell at the end of the pandemic.
Sure.
When businesses were hurt so badly during shutdowns and quarantines. It would be a tough sell
Sure.
right now.
Sure.
And what Chad refers to is maybe in the future things will change. Maybe they will. There was a plan for a while for a parking garage to go up just off Steinway back by the hospital. And that parking garage was going to have public restrooms galore. When that fell through, then that's when the movement toward, well, we've got to do something. Let's come up with the porta potties. And it's a good company. They stay on top of things.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Do they a lot of times porta potty companies, the units will be there for a little bit, but they don't just come and clean them. They take away those units and put fresh, newer units in. Are they doing that at Steinway, or is it literally the same?
I don't know. Do you know, Jill, are they doing that kind of replacement?
Or is it literally the same and they're just cleaning them constantly?
I think it is an extraordinary process anymore. These are reputable companies that do this. I can save the rest of my comments for public time if you wish, but I don't think none of these are these aren't fly-by-night operations. These are well-managed, large, companies that are doing this throughout, South Central PA.
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience in dealing with servicing of those units or the contractors, and I don't know that replacing a unit really is generally, I think that they're serviceable to an equivalent cleanliness
I'm just
and
thinking
suitability.
when they're out there for that long.
Yeah.
When they're out there for long periods of time, do they say, hey, we're going to have these out here for 3 months. We'll keep cleaning them, obviously, during that 3-month period, but then at the third month, we're removing those and putting fresh ones in.
Yeah, and I guess from my
Something like
experience,
that.
like I've seen, if that's kind of like your concern point, I've seen they can be very aggressively clean.
Okay.
Basically using pressure washers and so forth on site.
Mhm.
I've seen that done. Things mounted to the truck for that purpose, if that's kind of your concern. I don't know if regulating that is going to be kind of the issue. I do also kind of, Mr. Geis's letter, doesn't fall on deaf ears with me with that. it creates a complexity of where they could be located too. I do get a little concerned about how much regulation it would take to do. And I have to be candid, like, I think there are opportunities. There have been, specifically like with the Steinway corridor, and not just businesses, but there have been buildings, sometimes with nonprofits and different groups, that there have been buildings that have been redeveloped in the last 10 to 20 years that really had the opportunity to take care of this. And people chose not to because of the cost, and I can appreciate that. That's what drives a lot of this, but I think that many things that we ask people to do or require them to do are costly. And I don't know if that solely can, you know, be the driver. I mean, I think what I'm seeing here is that we probably need to get, this is not something I'm going to be able to give you the good direction you need.
I do want to note too that most of these ordinances have a carve out for recreational uses, which are essentially for public uses. So they allow seasonal public use by a public entity. Ms. Butterfield mentioned that some of the buildings aren't equipped for large groups of people. The businesses that are, chances are, it's not that businesses' customers that are using the porta-johns are being used as they're providing a public toilet to the public. And is that the responsibility of an individual business owner? And if that is what's happening, where they're feeling a lot of pressure from the public who aren't necessarily their customers, looking for a place to use the bathroom, are there centralized places that we can provide public facilities, whether it's porta-johns or a trailer, where individual businesses aren't necessarily responsible for providing the public toilets at large?
Yeah, I mean, it's certain, because it is certainly, it's not most, you know, it's frustrating not to be able to find it anywhere. But I think what I'm seeing is that we really need the input from our absent members to give you
Yes.
a good direction about where to go with this. I know that's probably not what you're looking to hear.
That's okay.
But with the number of people that are out tonight, it's just not, you know, the only other thing you could start to put together would to be essentially, but I think you have in this chart, you know, if people look across it, all right, there are some general different concepts if we pursue it with maintenance and screening and things of that nature. I think it's kind of premature to get too much further.
But it sounds like we do want to regulate them, or are we still even on the fence about that?
Oh, does anyone want to not regulate them at all?
Aren't the companies regulated?
But as a government, like, do you want to say do whatever you like? Is there anyone else that says
Can I put one in my front yard?
Do whatever you want to
No,
do?
I think if we're gonna do it, it has to be, absolutely has to be regulated.
Okay.
I mean, I think if it happens, we're going to be regulating it in some way.
In some way.
It just comes down to how stringent, if, you know.
I'll put together a PBS with a list of pertinent questions for the
Yeah, because I'm kind of looking at, like, those are, the categories you have are pretty much the pertinent categories.
Yeah.
You know, how far, does it have to be screened, if so, how?
How many times it has
How
to be
many
cleaned and all that.
Yeah, the only thing that bothers me about some of their language is related to the servicing.
It can't stink, is what it says.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be more inclined to point to something more objective, like a schedule.
I like this line, it cannot be an attractive nuisance to children.
I think an at least and no objectable odor, because you can have, I mean, some might fill up daily.
Right.
They probably don't, but they could. So saying every 2 weeks, might, or even every week might not
So
be
perhaps
right.
you have both, but I don't think you go
So-
with just a,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. A
you know,
minimum.
I think that really
Or as needed.
Or as needed. Yeah.
puts
That
you in
makes
really
sense.
a spot of, yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Okay, anything else about portable restrooms this evening? All right, the next item is something we actually dealt with a little bit during mostly with our special meeting, which is the creation of the rank of Master Sergeant. So when we amended the rules and regulations earlier this evening, we created that rank. The other matter that comes up there deals with the job responsibilities of that rank. So some of this is driven, we discussed this with the chief the other week. Some of this is driven by the acknowledgement that in the union contract, a sergeant makes 6.5% over their base, and a master sergeant makes 7.5% over their base. So we looked at different concepts for what the responsibilities would be. A big consideration was that you're only getting 1 more percent. So essentially what that percent pays that person for in this job description is they're still a sergeant and still function in that capacity, but if the chief of police is absent or incapacitated, then they function as the officer in charge, and we don't have a question about who does. Because at current, it's just not clear at all.
The borough made the mistake that many municipalities make, and they promoted people at the exact same time. So when you promote people at the exact same time, you have no seniority basis to base any chain of command direction off of. So you have 2 people that are the exact same stature as far as authority.
And I missed it after all those years at the Eisenhower farm.
Well,
We had a list. So no generals or admirals were made the 5-star rank on the same day. None. They were all separated out. And it literally went like every other day for a whole bunch of them there in 44. But yeah, it didn't occur to me at all when we did this.
the common vernacular used in the military or in law enforcement is time and grade. So if somebody has more time and grade, they're senior to that person, hence they're the next one in charge. We don't have that.
Right, yeah, it literally just doesn't exist. All right, questions, comments, mayor, chief, council about master sergeant creation? So we'll have that. Now we will have to start a testing process there. So we'll be voting next month. Well, maybe not. Sooner or later here, we'll be voting to advertise that,
Right.
which will be internal basically, but it still has to go through that process. So it'll be still a few months yet. All right, our next item is the personnel complaint policy, or what deals with employee transparency and accountability. This comes down to basically the role of the council. We discussed this with our labor council about basically when there is a complaint made against an employee, what the council is privy to, what it is not privy to, what it may know or not. And basically, when it comes down to it, if you do not have a policy that is embodied in resolution or in some other way, you don't really have an official, actual stance about how that works. So with many areas of the borough, as a council that is elected to hire a manager, and you have councils that do not and councils that do, as we do, there's no current requirement by policy or otherwise. Charles, as the manager, would have to inform us of any complaints that are filed, or anything that really comes to pass, no matter the severity of it. And then specifically with the police department, the same thing exists. There's no requirement that the chief or the mayor inform the council either of anything that is going on. And we have had situations where candidly that's occurred. So this is a policy that was drafted. This came from our labor council to basically require periodic reporting, which in this policy is framed up as monthly. of complaints, investigations, and outcomes or accountability measures from the manager, mayor, or chief of police involving external complaints filed by persons, including anonymous complaints regarding the operation of our government and the actions of our employees here at the borough. Mayor, I feel like you want to speak.
Does this apply to all employees? Because the only thing I see labeled in this draft is the police department. What about the other departments within the borough? How does this apply to them?
It's written to apply to.
It says
The police
police
department.
department and law enforcement.
But it also talks about all the other departments.
No, very
Right.
minimally, if it does.
It talks about the manager's oversight of his departments, and then
Where?
Well, are you referring to where are you at in the policy? The first paragraph?
Yes.
Okay, so in the first paragraph. Da-da-da-da-da. So the.
Borough Council has elected to hire a borough manager who is responsible for primary oversight of most departments within the borough government.
Yeah, so I'll just read it. So the Gettysburg Borough Council recognizes its role in preserving a positive image of its employees, that's all employees. Building and maintaining public trust is integral to effective government. As borough employees, it's all employees, have accepted positions of visible authority within the community, our community. It's Borough Council's role to ensure that they are held to a high standard of honesty, integrity, equity, and professionalism. I think what you're referring to is that it spells out because the police department is different.
Is under your jurisdiction. Mayor, elected
So
mayor.
it notes that council
We
is
have an
hired.
earlier.
We have an earlier
We don't
one
have the
that
right
you sent
copy.
out on August
This is the
20th.
one this is the one that's on the shared drive.
I just opened the shared drive, so this is what I'm looking at.
that's what I'm looking at.
This is the one that was on the shared drive this morning.
No, this is the one you emailed. I have the one he
Oh,
emailed.
this is the one you emailed?
This is-
Okay.
what was the email?
Are you referring to the one that I sent you via email?
Mhm.
You want me to look?
August 20th, Saturday.
Yeah, look at the few bullets under permits. I just printed it out today.
Yeah, I'll just take more time to
Few
review
bullets
it.
under permits are
To create
Yeah,
an environment.
employee, employee-wide.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same document. Borough Council is elected to hire managers responsible for primary oversight in most departments within the borough. Also, Borough Council also recognizes the role of its elected mayor and the chief of police related to specifically to its police department. Mayor and chief of police are responsible to ensure the members of the police department are demonstrating positive behavior, informing the community about the department's role, maintaining honor and integrity of the organization, and building and sustaining a trust working relationship between the public and police. So that was carved out because there's, right with the borough code, there's a very specific differentiation. The mayor oversees the police department and has direct oversight of it. The borough council has legislative authority to enact policy of how the
I'm
police
familiar
department
with the borough
operates.
code, but this is not what we received.
Yeah,
That
this
is not what we received.
Yeah, this
Yeah,
one starts, the
we'll have
Gettysburg
to-
Borough Council recognizes its role in preventing or preserving a positive image of its police department and the professional employees working in law enforcement.
We'll just review
That's-
the latest one.
Yep.
It'll have to be under.
This
review.
is the attachment.
On the shared drive, it's labeled Employee Complaint Policy 2.0.
No, that's not where I got this morning. I got it under the, well, I didn't, this isn't the one that you emailed me, I don't know which one, but,
Yeah, the one I emailed you is Employee Complaints Policy 2.0, which candidly is because there was a draft initially from our Labor Council, and Mr. Moon and I gave them feedback that this wasn't to be
then this
about.
is apparently the draft that you got from Labor Council then, which, because this is all police driven.
Yeah, that this wasn't to
Absolutely
be
all.
about the police department alone.
That's what I thought we agreed on in the borough leadership meeting, so it's a miscommunication because the email that you sent saying, Rob, I forgot to forward you this file.
Has 2.0 attached to it, like I'm looking at. I don't know.
Okay.
It sounds to me
Somehow
like
we
need
got the
to-
old one.
It sounds like to me like we need to revisit this in September.
Correct.
Okay,
Well, it's a workshop meeting. We're not voting for anything today anyway.
that's fair.
Good point, Joe. Thank you.
So yeah, I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. Because candidly, that was when they first drafted it. We had a number of pieces of feedback. That was a big one. it also didn't necessarily get specific about what would be, what items or what components would have to be told to the council. The summaries were quite vague about what that would be. Because I think when the borough has exposure, and we have had, I know that specifically you oversee the police department, mayor and chief, that's your department, but we've had complaints across the borough in my time. And it is meant to address all areas.
Okay, that's not what we received, sorry,
Yeah,
so there was some
okay.
kind of miscommunication.
All right, so, yeah,
I can shake your
we'll
shirt.
make sure we get everybody on the same page for next month.
Yep.
I will resend that email, and we will visit it then. All right. Public comment, items not on the agenda. All right, if not, we will adjourn to, yes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yes. I've been waiting well.
If you have public
Yes.
comment, if you can use the mic just so the public at home can.
Oh, I have to go up there.
Well, it helps a lot because they don't have a microphone at your seat.
My name's Jen Reisinger. I'm a resident of Gettysburg. I live on North 4th Street. I've lived there about 7 years now. And I have questions and concerns about the speeding on North 4th Street. It's used as a cut-across road for many, including trucks, UPS, delivery trucks, also even the buses, people commuting to work because it takes you out to Route 30, opposite way to Old Harrisburg Road. This is a neighborhood, my neighborhood, with sidewalks, an elementary school, Vita Charter, children walking to school. I myself have small grandchildren. I use it for walking, running, bike riding, and it's getting insane. Probably 6 weeks ago, a friend and myself, I sat on 4th Street in my yard, and my friend sat on Broadway where they put the speed humps in, and the sidewalk's very beautiful. And the traffic count for me in 1 hour was twice as much. So I'm just wondering about speed control, possibly the speed humps there. I know that was a lot of money and a lot of planning and time and so forth, but you know, I live here and I work here and I think it's not safe.
Yep, I think that we can look at enforcement there, and I know, this is public comment portion, but I can tell you that when I got my driver's license, they intentionally took you down there. They thought you would go over the speed limit. So that tells you a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming and bringing that to our attention. Appreciate it.
Sure. I actually had an incident last week where I was out in my yard watering, you know, so I was close to the street. It's been so dry. And a truck flew by. And I yelled, I said, slow down. And they actually stopped, turned around, came back, turned around again and stopped the vehicle and was yelling at me. And I was just like, whoa. So it was, anyway, just there's a school, and kids walking back and forth, and people just fly, and they are just used to it. And, I have in the past, a couple of years ago, called the police and asked them, and they did come, but they probably sat for, 10 minutes and they were gone, and I never saw them again. So, I mean, I know everybody's busy, but it would be great if someone looked into that.
Mr. President, if I may interject on this particular point, there is an advocacy momentum that the constituency of Gettysburg could help our police department in this regard. This is a policy and initiative that the Pennsylvania Municipal League has been advocating for decades, and that is Pennsylvania is the only state in the union that does not permit local radar. So our police department is operating at a significant disadvantage compared to other local police departments across the country. If this is such an issue, and it is because we hear it regularly, you're not the first person to come to this council and talk about this issue. The people of Gettysburg really need to communicate directly with their state senator and state representative to advocate for the passage of local radar use. That would give Chief Glennie and our department a significant tool to help with this particular issue. So I encourage you, and we have actually a very small window yet this year to get it done. If it doesn't get done this year, we'll have a new legislative session in Harrisburg beginning next year, because we're getting ready to have an election. And then we start at ground zero again.
Again.
Yeah.
Because we
So
spoke with Senator.
I encourage everyone in this municipality, if this is an issue that you feel very strongly about, you need to reach out to Senator Mastriano and Representative Mal. Let your voice be known to them that they need to take this issue to the legislature in Harrisburg and encourage the governor to sign it.
It's been introduced.
I believe it's through the Senate.
And I think it's through one of the houses.
I think
Yeah,
the Senate
people-
has passed it. I'm not
Because we-
100% sure, but I believe the Senate.
I think it's Senate Bill 115, but don't quote me on that. However, we have spoke to Senator Mao about it. And we were on our way to Harrisburg at a rally at the Capitol to talk about it. And I got booted. But we are aware of it. And it's something that, as Mr. Gable said, Pennsylvania is one of the few states, and this has been introduced
only state.
Thank you. It's been introduced over and over for years. We were talking about it at our mayor's conference, and we need people to get out and support the passage of this bill. And if it makes you feel better, you should be on the street where I live,
What street is that?
South Washington. At nighttime, especially the motorcycles, it sounds like the Indianapolis Speedway.
Yeah, it's annoying.
We will come out and take a look at the tools that we have now, but I do appreciate Mr. Gable bringing that up. It's very important. I always say jokingly, we've been going to get radar next year for the last 35 years. That's how
Okay.
long I've been doing this. But it is much closer now, and we've got Mayor Freeling and I have talked to Representative Mao, and he's assured us that if it clears committee, he will vote for it. But that's I don't know what pressure he can bring to bear to get it to clear the committee, but I believe it's passed the Senate, and we're just waiting for the House, and it's a very limited time now for us to get that through in this legislative session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any other public comment this evening?
Can I make a quick comment?
You may.
And I will be quick. Portable restrooms. I encourage you to be aware of the current situation and where you are. I appreciate the fact that we're looking down the road at developing the Welcome Center as a solution, but that has been in play for several years and still is not on the horizon. It's not shovel ready yet. We're making progress towards that, but that's not a solution for somebody that has to use the bathroom right now. The same thing for Steinway Avenue. I agree, we need to look at permanent cleanable facilities and things long-term, but let's not cut our nose off despite our face and our 3 million or so visitors that come here that want to come, and we want them to come back, and we don't want them to not come back because we're not providing basic services. I think we have reputable companies that we can work within, and let's not over-regulate it to the point that we shoot ourselves in the foot. Thank you. Good night.
Public comment? All right, if not, we will adjourn to executive session.